Hey, and welcome to my third degree collection sketchbook tour. I started this little guy in July of 2020 and just filled it up, so I thought I'd show you the tour of it. It's a third one of my degree collection process, so if you want to check out the two previous videos, I'm going to link them down below. And for the sake of continuity, you can check out from the research stage to the development and to the final thing in this sketchbook. I got the sketchbook in Tiger, a random shop in Tallinn, which was like €3 I think, so it was quite cheap. So I started this in July when I came to Estonia and got stuck here, so I continued the degree collection development process. I just wrote down all of the 6 looks and all the details that I had to finish with them. So there was a lot of stuff to be done in Estonia, and because I was stuck here, I wasn't really sure how I'm gonna do all of this. I had to figure out the place, how I could sew, find the atelier, or maybe buy a sewing machine, so that was a bit of a mess. So I just decided to kind of scale it down and write everything that I had to do for the collection. This one's the range plan that was initially finalized with my degree collection assessment, and that was what I submitted then. But I went through a lot of changes, so I just wrote down the things I had to do again and stuck it in my sketchbook just to have some sort of reference as to what I'm working with right now. By that point, I only had finished those trousers in Moscow because we were on lockdown. We were the first group of students to face a pandemic, so I had only finished those trousers and started a skirt. So at this point, these 2 looks were kind of in process. All the rest was a question mark. By the end of August, I believe, we had to do a first photo shoot of the few looks that we had done, and I had just started working on the 2 looks. Once I had finished them, we were in the process of submitting new photos of our degree collections, and obviously we were not expected to produce a whole collection after the pandemic situation, so everyone had to produce what they could. So I made this look fully and took a photo shoot of it. Because the trousers that I had finished were in Moscow, I was not able to have a photo shoot with those, so that was the only thing I could finish. And as you can see on the photo shoot, you don't really see this huge ass backpack with a bunch of documents crumpled upon, because I was not able to print on top of fabric in Estonia because it was way too expensive. So I just opted to create whatever I had. Luckily, I had an access to an atelier, so I was able to sew on a very thick threading machine, which is usually meant for denim, to add the decorative stitching that I initially planned to do with this patchwork skirt. Here you can see just a bunch of different notes that I had to do. I found a place that was able to print on top of my polyester deadstock mesh that I bought here in Tallinn very cheap in a deadstock fabric spot, and I was able to print on top of it, but it was very expensive, so I tried to do as minimal printing as possible, so I had to kind of play around with that as well. And because I had already done prints in Moscow, which got sent to me, and it was a very strenuous process of me getting that package to Estonia in the first place, but I had to find a place that had a big enough heat transfer panel to transfer the prints onto my fabric, which was a bit problematic, but we found a way to do that. Then it was time to start working on those trousers, which I absolutely loved creating the mock-up for in Moscow, which you can find on my vlogs, by the way. I did have some of the fabric sent to me from Moscow, but that wasn't even close to enough even to make half of the trousers, and I had to try and find the closest match, which was a bit of a challenge again. Color wise, it was a good match, but there you can see the thickness of those threads woven into the fabric, which wasn't ideal, but at least I had something to work with. So I started figuring out those trousers, and again, once I finished them, I had Sandra, my friend from school, who's also a model those trousers for me so that I could take another photo shoot and send them in again for the exhibition that I was not able to be physically a part of, but my group mates helped set up all of the stuff that I had in Moscow to be actually a part of it somehow. I made this mood board for the photo shoot with Sandra, and I was trying to recreate an environment of an airport waiting room, so that was the idea for those photos. I had to edit her in, and obviously with my lack of Photoshop knowledge, that was the best I could do, especially not knowing how to take professional photographs, so just got me some slack. Later on, I started thinking of potential other looks, and I just randomly quickly sketched up an idea of what I could do with the leftovers, again out of the same leftover fabric which I used for the trousers. And surprisingly, even though I initially thought I wouldn't have enough of that fabric because those trousers take up so much of it, I still had some of it left over for a potential look idea. But I did not really like this look because it looked too princessy, too like cutesy and all that, and my degree collection had nothing to do with that aesthetic, so it wasn't really a good option. I still had some of that fabric left over, so I thought I could make maybe an accessory or something out of it. So I started sketching out different ideas, again thinking of crumpling method, how to crumple documents and then print over top of it, which would be a stamp as if you're stamping a passport or stamping a document. So I was thinking of creating something like that, and in the end I made this, which I'm very happy with. I was very happy with that bag. Unfortunately, still not able to add some sort of print over top of it, but that's fine, I can do it some point later. Again, a few details from the photo shoot. My group mates were able to take photos of their degree collections in Moscow for our school archive, and because my trousers were there, they were able to take photos of my trousers at least in there, so that I could Photoshop them together to have some sort of photo of look number 1, which was fine because I had made that mesh top in Estonia already. Because I was taking inspiration in passport photography, I took photos of Sandra in a way as if you were taking a passport photo to make it a bit more formal, to add some stamps over top of it, because I've noticed in Estonian documents and like Russian documents quite often, if it's not a passport, you usually get a stamp over top half your face, so I really like that aesthetic and I try to do that. We've always been advised when you are creating a degree collection, at first you will probably have some sort of sketches or illustrations of the looks, but then once you take photos of them, better update your range plan with actual photos of the looks. So at least I was able to add the first 3 looks, which were done by this point in a photo form. They actually went through a bit of a transformation later on as well, but that was what I was working on. These 3 looks were still a mystery. I added a few more photos from that photo shoot just to get some sort of inspiration, just to have it in my sketchbook. There came an idea that was absolutely not related to those photos whatsoever, but because I was working with crumbling, and from my previous sketchbook I had an idea of an unstraight seam, and I wanted to do a closure which was not very straight, which typically would be on a shirt, so I sketched it all here. Because this was the second photo shoot once the trousers were finished, I was able to ask another model to come in as well. This is actually a younger brother of my best friend, so he was very kind enough to model, and because those trousers I accidentally made them too wide in the waistline, they were able to fit Sandra with a bunch of pinching on the back, and they were able to fit Daniel as well. So I took 2 photos just for the sake of it being unisex and having a visual representation of the fact that my collection is not just women's wear. Actually, the clothing does not have a gender on it. And because the first 3 looks were now done, it was time to move on to this organza dress. I found the fabric, and again, that dead stock fabric place that I absolutely love. This was organza synthetic, which was good enough for me because I had to try and find a way to transfer my print onto this, and because I was working with sublimation printing, which is printing onto paper and then under heat press printing it onto fabric, it performs the best with synthetic. So I was very happy to find a synthetic organza in dead stock. In the sketchbook you kind of find me randomly working on multiple things at the same time, so we're quickly jumping onto that bag that I was working on and the final photos of that thing, and then a few photos of Sandra in look number 2. I did a few pointers of what I could change in this look, and then moved on to working with that organza as well. By that point I had already started making that dress for the degree collection and started noticing a few details. So when you're working with a look, you have to try and play around with your fabric first of all, because you never know how it's going to perform, especially when it is an organza which is on the cheaper end. It usually is very prone to fraying, and you never know if it's going to have holes in it whenever you touch it accidentally with something. So I had to play around a little, and because I was working on an industrial zigzag machine, I really wanted to see how it's going to perform, so I played around with very tiny zigzag, which could give me a very interesting texture. I played around with adding a very strong ridgeline binding for that dress because I had to add it to the shoulders so that they would stand up pretty well. I made my own bias binding, which took a while just because it's organza, but I found a really good cheater method, so you can check it out as well. I added an elastic which looked really good gathered up with the zigzag stitch. I found a stitch length for the zigzag which worked the best. From that on, because I really like this stitching that the zigzag gives a little bit of a texture and a little bit of a base, I don't know, sausage line, I thought that could be a very interesting idea to add some sort of texture. So I came up with this sort of night slip design dress, whatever it is, and it kind of stems from my previous sketchbook which had an idea of pat downs, and I made sort of like a pat down map of the body. When you go to the airport security line, you have a pat down, so I made this pat down map of the body and I drew inspiration for the lines and for the stitching from that sketchbook. It's really good that I have those sketchbooks uploaded to my YouTube channel because now I'm able to kind of reference back to them myself. I took a bunch of photos of the process when I was working in the collection in Moscow, and I had access to a bunch of photos of the top that I was creating for the collection initially, so I started playing around with them again. And this was actually a piece of a bodysuit that I cut out for that dress of organza. Really like how it looked. In the end, this became a top for look number 4, which you'll see a bit later. So here's a quick tip that you might find interesting. Whenever I cut out my details for pattern pieces, whatever they're meant for, I'm going to try and play around with them in a different part of the body. Even though this is a cut of a bodysuit and this is supposed to be on the top part of the body, it was supposed to be lying front and down, and I started just pulling it out different directions, especially because it was kind of relating to my degree collection research again. When you go through security check in airport, you have to take off some of your clothes and to just pass through it, and when you put them back on, they're kind of twisted and pulled different directions, and obviously you would not take your t-shirt or a very skin tight top off, but this was sort of playing around with that idea, even though this is a base layer of clothing that you would probably wear. After that, I took a bunch of photos more. I played around with that bodysuit on myself as well, besides the mannequin, and then just took a bunch of random cutouts and sketched out the idea that I liked the best, which later became again the top for look number 4. I also printed out my commercial range plan, which we had to submit on the degree collection as well. In our university, at least, we had to make a collection of 6 pieces which were our creative and crazy ideas, and then we had to tone it down and create a commercial version of that collection, so to just widen our portfolios and to show a potential employer that we can also do something more toned down and actually wearable. I really like this commercial collection. I just printed it out to have it in my sketchbook side by side with all the accessories that I made. I took apart a bunch of old bags that my mom wanted to throw out, and I took out all of the little hardware that I could use, not for my degree collection's sake, but I just added those photos in just in case I need something. And then I made some earrings out of leftovers from the bag that I created. I gelatinized them actually, and I'll probably have a vlog about that, so you can check this technique out as well. So in this commercial range plan, I absolutely love this look. I love this look. I really want to recreate it physically, but a lot of it requires printing, so I'm probably going to do that a little bit later on. But some pieces of fabric from those leggings I actually do have already left over from looks that I work on in the sketchbook a bit further, so I'm definitely going to be reusing that. A few sketches, a few ideas for potential tops or bodysuits or something else. I don't think I found anything specifically for this collection in this look, but I really like this. I thought of adding boning here, but that's not for the degree collection. Again, in here I was playing around with this dress idea, trying to make it a little bit less princessy, and I added this pleat creating positioning specifically from that pat down map. I made a very similar thing when I was in Moscow developing my collection when we were physically able to go to uni before the whole lockdown started. So I tried to transfer it back here and work a little more on it, but again, it looked too princessy and did not fit my collection. I thought of making it a little bit more formal and adding this formal collar on top of it because I had the idea for look number 4, which was a bit more formalized and a jacket like, but again, did not really like it so much, so just left it here. Continue working on leggings. Because I had made the printing for tops, I also made prints for my leggings and I started working in them. And if you can see on this sketch, I have a little underwear portion over top of those leggings, so I had to put them on myself and physically stitch them while they were on my body, trying not to attach my stockings onto them because it was winter, it was fucking cold. Then a little section from that dress that I was developing. This is the organza dress. This was the sample thing. I initially thought that it would have to be in 2 layers, but then turned out just 1 layer was good enough to have some sort of transparency. And this was me playing around with different tensions with different zigzag lengths, and I think I ended up choosing this one because it gave the most gather. This was the piece of that elastic that I found. This is underwear elastic that was so soft and gentle, and again from that deadstock fabric place. Never gonna stop raving about Kanga Jungle Outlet. This is the best place ever in Thailand, so definitely go check it out if you're here. Then it was time to move on to look number 6, the huge ass blank. I was stressing over even just thinking that I'm gonna have to work on it at some point, so I tried to find different ways of layering fabric in a way that you would not see a metal mesh that I bought for it from underneath. If you check this out, I have a little metal wire mesh on the inside, then I have a layer of white felt, then I have my final white fabric, and then my final grey fabric. And in here there are different things, different incisions that I tried to put inside to find the best option that would actually suit that look. Jumping between things, a few more top designs, a few more top ideas. By that point I had not decided on another look, so it was just coming up to places. And because I was working with a jersey fabric and I found in that deadstock fabric place again a very beautiful thread that was fitting my DB collection color palette, I bought it, played around with it, liked it looking like lace, and then all the leftovers I just could not bring myself to throw out. I added them here as well. Even though I really love this look and I really wanted to create it because there was so much development and idea and thought process going into the design of it, I was physically not able to do it in Thailand just because it would be so freaking expensive to even try to work around with this, so it just had to be scrapped. I would love to make it in the future at some point, but I really don't think that's going to be the case anytime soon, so this had to go. And my collection was left with 5 pieces, which I would have to renew look number 4 for. So I just wrote down all of the ideas that I could do. The only bit of waste that was coming from look number 4 was this teardrop shape that was coming from the middle in the neckline. With this teardrop shape, I kind of sketched out a few more ideas that I could reuse. I was thinking of making like a bra, and I'm still going to be using it, I'm pretty sure. Then later on we moved on to more designs of look number 4, which was replacing that jacket I really liked. So I started sketching out a few more ideas of leggings and tops. As you can see, this is an illustrated version of that top that I really like from those experiments that I sketched out. And then the leggings came from that pat down idea as well. Because I drew myself a pat down map and where everything was going, I started sketching out a few more thoughts, a few options of how the stitching could go. As you can see, there are a few more options, but then I settled on one that has a little bit of ruching kind of stitching going on the sides, just to have some sort of repetition with the dress from look number 5, because that dress has gathers on the sides, and then my leggings for look number 6 also have gathers on the sides. I wanted to mimic that. Even though this is a completely different method of showing the same idea, it is flattening the idea but still has some sort of visual similarity to the other looks. So this is that one thing that is sort of linking the pieces together. On this side you can see my first trial fabric, my first trial stitches. It was a bit tricky to get it done, but I really liked it. You can see me still trying to come up with different options, a simplified version of that jacket that was still supposed to be replaced of look number 4, but this page sort of gave me an understanding that this look is definitely not going to happen for this collection, so just get rid of it and move on. This is precisely what I did. So I got rid of that jacket. In place of that came this look, but I still tried to sketch out something, maybe a potential jacket over top, maybe something could come to this. This color fits with the collection a bit better. It is a striking difference to what it was before. It's a simpler look, the silhouette is more slim, it goes with the body, doesn't distract you from everything. This is something I learned this year. When you're working on a collection, you have to think about how each look interacts with a different one. So the reason why this set of leggings and a top looks a lot better in here than that jacket, even though that jacket was very beautiful and interesting, it was way too heavy, especially when I was sitting next to a pair of trousers that already had so much detail, so much stuff going on. And instead of that, these leggings are way more simple. They're tight to the body, so you're only focusing on the silhouette of the body, so you're not distracted visually. They don't have any print, and they are very simple and like a dark block of color. In reality, this is a lot darker, so your eye gets a little bit of relaxation in between these two looks, which do have a lot more going on than those leggings and a top. And so after I had settled on a top and leggings design, I made my first mock-up in a stretchy cotton fabric, so obviously it would perform very differently, but I really liked it because I embroidered this the same way I embroidered a bag. So a bunch of little paper clips embroidered in a similar thread, and I really like how it looked, but the leggings had to have some work done with them. I didn't really like the positioning of the underwear stitching. I wanted it to look a bit more thong-like and then go higher up. So I was very happy that I made this mock-up, especially knowing the fact that I accidentally cut the fabric on the wrong grain direction and was stretching lengthwise rather than stretching widthwise, which is absolutely not what you want to have in a legging pair. Once the top was tested out, I made the final thing, and I also changed the top for look number 2. This was the leather t-shirt looking thing, and it looked so awkward in a photo shoot that I was very glad to change it. And again, there was some continuity now. So look number 2 had the same top as look number 4. Now there was some cohesion. And also I really like the stitching idea, so I thought of maybe making a bra and underwear set, or like a crop top and underwear set, or like, oh, this could be a very cool bikini. I might still come back to this. I really like this. Now again, jumping onto a completely different thing. In a couple of weeks before this, I tried a new technique. So I was trapping all of my synthetic polyester offcuts in between polyester organza and just stitching over top. I really like the texture that it gives me, and it was very playful because all of the different pieces were mishmashing together underneath the stitching. So I thought of maybe making a bag out of that. So this was my initial plan, my sketch. Also, because I've been working in the atelier, they do have a lot of different fabric offcuts, especially leather, synthetic leather offcuts, because they're working a lot with furniture and just reupholstering everything. So I had a bunch of material to work with, so I started sketching the idea and I tried to make that. Jumping back to that organza thing, because I wanted to introduce crumpling into that slip dress as well, I was thinking of crumpling the bust cups. But then once I did that on this sketch, I thought that maybe an underwear set would look a lot more interesting and a little less cluttered. So that was exactly what I did. I made a crumpled organza bra top and then very high-waisted set of underwear with crumpling gathering on the side. I really liked that idea. It was very nice, very cute. And then later on it came into my degree collection in itself. I wanted to introduce the actual physical meta bent paperclip as well, especially because I had this on a sketch of that bag. So my dad and I purchased maybe 6 meters of 4mm wire and I started bending it. I first bent it into this paperclip shape, tried to gather a little bit of synthetic leather onto it, and then I played around with this on the body, on the bust, and I made like a bust top out of it. It looked interesting, but later on I decided not to introduce it to my degree collection in itself. Maybe it will come back at some point, but I'm not really sure about this. You saw this bra idea when I sketched out those teardrop shape cutouts out of look number 6, but I decided to introduce them in a new way. But this looked a little bit too cutesy again. Like sometimes when I'm just sketching ideas out of nowhere, it goes back to basics. So that is the reason why I do really like a lot of research, a lot of depth, a lot of layers to my process, because otherwise it would probably look a little too basic, too simple. So I started making that bag, and in the process I decided not to go with vertical position of those paper clips, but I decided to put them on a slight angle. And this diagonal version seems interesting to me. I feel like trapping this in organza made this again a little bit too cutesy, and that is just something that happens to my work sometimes, when in reality all the outcomes don't really look like that. So this felt a little out of place, so I decided not to throw it onto the photo shoot. But out of this experiment came this bag. Again, this organza finishing could use some work, and initially I was thinking of finishing everything in my organza bias, which would have given this a little bit more of a crisp edge. And in hindsight I should have probably done that, but it's done now. I don't hate it, and I feel like this paperclip bag positioning is pretty interesting. It's just a clutch bag that you strap this paperclip onto. The paperclip in itself is actually finished in a stretchy bias, so it's very soft to the touch. It's an interesting idea. I could expand on it, but for now this was the bag that I actually sent to Moscow for the photo shoot. With that, I also made 2 face masks. This one was made out of all the tiniest offcuts from that synthetic stretchy mesh that I had my print printed on top of, and I really liked it because there are some pieces which were this size and I still managed to overlook and incorporate them as well, which was really cool. By the way, this mask has a cotton lining, which is not really great in terms of pairing 2 materials together, so synthetic and natural, but when you have to breathe out of something it has to be cotton, so I decided to actually make this thing usable rather than just an accessory. This was the final version of that look number 4. In here it looks a lot darker than it is in reality. This is a bit more representative of the actual color, but I really like this outcome. I obviously had to test out a bunch of stitching methods on this jersey as well. This one I got obviously from the one and only place I ever get my fabrics from. Even though I had already tested out this exact type of stitching on a different jersey, I had to do that all over again just because this fabric was a little bit different and behaved a bit differently. It was a bit thinner than the previous one. It didn't have the looping on the bottom, so it had to be done all over again, and I'm very glad about that because you can see how many trials it got me before I actually got the final result, which I ended up using. So this was the look. I love the stitching, I love the leggings. They actually fit me as well, but obviously the model they would fit a little bit better. I love the way they go around the muscles, and thanks to that first trial that I made on those lilac leggings, I was able to manage the positioning of the stitching a lot better, and it looked finished and more crisp. Out of that stitching came another idea that in itself could merge 2 different things. Leather skirt from look number 2, which was made in a patchwork method, and then this kind of stitching introduced into a completely new different thing. So this was an interesting idea which could later on resurface again in this collection. Because I was not quite done with a few old experiments which I never ended up using, I started bringing back an idea from either sketchbook 1 or sketchbook 2. This was an undressing experiment, so I put on a lot of different underwear and trousers and pants over top of each other, and I pulled them down in an attempt to express that idea of you have to kind of undress when you're going through security check, which I wanted to showcase in a bit of an exaggerated way, so this was the experiment. And I sketched out a few ideas, initially thinking that this could be the organza version of the skirt. I started making it on a mannequin. I absolutely hated it, so I came up with the idea of maybe reusing all of my leftover pieces of fabric from the collection, which would be a little bit more sturdy. So I was thinking of either linens from look number 3 or my printed blank fabric, which was pretty expensive to make here in Estonia, and I still had a bunch left over, so I ended up using that. And I sketched out this idea. I absolutely loved how it looked. I tried to make it on a mannequin, and those droopy pockets were pretty difficult to come up with. Probably there is a way to do that, and I'm sure I would have figured it out as well, but I thought that maybe I could just eliminate them on their own. And luckily, I had just completed a 3D garment modeling course with Pushka School in a program called Chloe 3D. I was able to create this garment simulation. This is actually my diploma project for Pushka School, so I was able to combine the two pieces together and actually physically then make this skirt in real life, which was so cool because it looked very similar to the skirt, and I was able to tweak out different details, different color positioning, which I liked. And initially I actually was thinking in here a white piece of fabric, but then I really liked how the dark blue looked. And this is actually the same piece of jersey fabric from look number 4, so again playing around with the same fabrics that already exist in the collection to add some continuity and cohesion to the collection. And this is how my range plan looked in the final form. I have 7 looks instead of 6, and even though I had to replace look number 4, which was this beautiful jacket, it got replaced with 2 different pieces, and I like the way it looks now a lot better than it was before. I sent all of those pieces to Moscow, and in here you can see this is the only exception of the skirt which was illustrated and not taken in photos of, because I finished it like a day before I had to send it all to Moscow. I didn't have a photo here, but the only difference to this collection that there actually is now is that this dress does not have a print yet. I have to make it in Moscow, and once I get there I actually will do that, because otherwise this dress looks way too plain for the collection. And except for those trousers, all of the pieces that you see here were made in Estonia, which was shocking to me. And not to say that Estonia doesn't have facilities, it's just way more expensive and way more tricky for me to do that in here, just because in our uni we had absolutely every machine, everything possible, all the technicians, all the help, and in here we had to kind of figure it out on our own. But my dad actually truly made it all possible, so thank you so much. And with this, my degree collection stuff is finished. However, because I had some fabric left, so I wanted to continue this whole process, and because initially it was very difficult for me to work with just 6 looks when I have so many different ideas, so I started continuing this whole idea. And now, even though the collection in itself is finished, I have started making an extension of that degree collection. I'm continuing to work with similar ideas that I had in my collection in the process that I never ended up using in here, and developing a few more things. So there are a few more pages that I was thinking. With this garment simulation, I did come up with a few more options as to how I could first of all improve this, or just play with different color schemes and different color pieces from the degree collection color palette in itself. I still have enough of that fabric left for it to make a few more skirts like this, but I don't want to waste all of that fabric onto this specific skirt, because there are so many different ideas I could explore, and this could always be replicated in the future. So I created another garment simulation. This was a very quick one, hence why it is a little bit messy, but I wanted to play around with some of leftover red leather that I had from the atelier, because it's in the same color palette, and then some of that linen leftovers which I had as well. So I sketched out this idea, tried it in 3D, and this is something that I'm currently working on, but be on the lookout for something similar to this in a few weeks. Maybe I'm going to be posting a process diary vlog, which is coming next week, so stay on the lookout for that skirt process physically. And then again, because I really like those old experiments, this was actually that pleating experiment that I talked about, the pat-down map. I made a version with pleating, I made a version with stretchy fabric, and none of them looked particularly perfect for me, so I decided to maybe recreate them in a different format. So because I had this bent paper clip in metal that my dad and I got, I decided to introduce the two pieces together and kind of merge them in a new method. So I sketched those options out, and because I do have a lot of leftover fabrics, I thought of making it in a patchwork method again to bring some uniformity to the collection itself. So I put a few fabric pieces in here which could potentially go with this look, and this is sort of like an inspiration mood board for the potential look. My dad and I went and got 6 more meters of that wire, but this time I grabbed a 5mm one instead of 4mm, and honestly that was a very big mistake, just because it's so much more difficult to bend this wire. Never would have thought that 1mm makes such a huge difference, but I still managed to kind of bend it on the body. And if you can see in here, this was very close with a lot of sharp edges, and in reality it's very hard to bend a thick wire exactly the same way, so I had to compromise and kind of go around the body. I really like this method, and I like this outcome even more than before. But because I did not yet know what that would be, I didn't know if that would be a dress or a top. Here I had this sketched out as a dress, so I started doing that. I liked the top portion, wasn't sure about the bottom portion, and it was a bit difficult for me to sketch this out initially, so I thought maybe if that was a bodysuit I would have a lot less trouble working with it. And when I just photoshopped a few options, a few positioning and few directions for the gathering to go, I like this a lot more. Maybe because there is again a little bit of repetition of that very high-waisted slit on the thighs, which we have in stitching on leggings on look number 4, on leggings on look number 6, and the dress of look number 5. There is some more repetition, which is a lot more visually pleasing to me. Maybe that's why I gravitated towards a bodysuit instead instead of a dress. I noticed that I feel a lot more comfortable working with the fronts rather than the backs of the thing. When I work on a mannequin, I work with the side, with the front, with the back. It's like a 360 experience. But when it comes to working flats, it's a lot more difficult for me to design the backs. So I did a few more options again in Photoshop, just merging different directions for the pulling and for the gathering to go. And I think I landed on something like this or this, just because it is a lot more visually similar to the tops of look number 4 with the leggings and look number 2 with the leather skirt. The backs of those do have this sort of racer back on one side, and I think if I were to introduce this into that as well, it would look a lot more cohesive. And this page brings us to what I've been working on these past 2 weeks. Again, bending paper clips out of shape, but this time I decided to distort them a little bit, so not keeping their original shape but actually bending them out even more. And I made 3 more versions of that paperclip bending, and I absolutely love them. So I created this top version, and that's what I'm gonna be working on these next couple of weeks. I then took a bunch of photos on them flat. I combined them together. This photo has all 3 paper clips together, and I tried to just line them up so that they will visually look like they're one continuous piece. And I play around with this just for potential inspiration, potential ideas. Maybe that could bring me some sort of inspiration for a dress or a jacket or whatever. Those kind of experiments are something I'm gravitating towards all the time. If you have an idea, you develop it, you distort it, you add some process on it, you create this in a completely different medium, then you take photos of it, you distort it. Like, I love layering processes so much. That's why I love taking random photos like these as well. Even though this does not have any particular reference to me right now, it might become a very interesting idea for a potential detail or potential print even. Maybe I will just draw a bunch of those flats and then use them as a print over top, which will have a lot of connection logically because this is a bent out of shape paperclip, but will from afar look like a random squiggly print, which is really cool because when you have so many different ideas built into one thing, one detail, one print, let's say, brings so much cohesion, so much depth to your simple garment, whatever it may be. So this is where we're at right now. I'm gonna be working on this a lot more. The sketchbook is now done. I'm gonna have to buy another sketchbook because I absolutely love working in a sketchbook. Personally, I would say this is the best medium for working with fashion design process because it brings a lot of your thoughts into one page, into one box. Other than the sketchbook, I've also been working on a mood board on my wall, which is a 1.5 meter long piece of paper that I'm just gluing a bunch of photos and fabric samples onto, but the sketchbook is always the most useful thing for me. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Go check out the 2 previous sketchbook tours that I've done, and if you were interested, consider subscribing because alongside this whole sketchbook there was a lot of physical design development process. This is a little bit under a year worth of work, and there are so many different processes that I've been working on, and things that did work, things that didn't work, so all of those are going to be in my degree collection playlist, so go check it out as well. Thank you for watching. Bye.